All right.
That would be real quick. He's outside. Oh wait, I can't. I'm trying to drive the bus over here.
Okay.
It not let me move my. What is going on? Okay, let's. Oh, I see. Here we go.
All right.
Okay, how does that look?
Awesome. Yep. Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yeah. I am Rebecca Baylock. I'm with the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition, and we do have a comprehensive TA and training grant under the Office on Violence Against Women, and we focus on sex trafficking in Indian country and Alaska. That does include, Indian country itself, urban communities, suburban, rural, and also our relatives down in Hawaii and indigenous folks in Puerto Rico actually has come up with once or twice. So I'll give a brief introduction. Rebecca Baylock. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Appalachians in Pennsylvania. I do sit 10 to 15-minute drive from the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, which was the first boarding school rather. And the local community here in Pennsylvania, we take care of the children's grave sites. Pennsylvania itself does not have any Indian country, not state, not federal. We're just an intertribal community. And we really have a great community up here on the East Coast supporting each other. And sex trafficking, where we're located out here on the East Coast, is in the middle of New York City, Philly, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. So we're talking about pipelines too that are all across the land in those pipelines of trafficking survivors and trafficking victims from one state to the next. And we'll get into that too with some storytelling. That trafficking, there's that one documentary, I think it was called Hunting the Res. And unfortunately, that's something that we'll have to talk about today because of jurisdiction with COVID. Oh my gosh, it changed so much about trafficking, but folks are often hunting the res. Not even in real life, it's also happening digitally everywhere. So we're going to get into a lot today about that. Oh, I am a mother of 3 boys, and I am Oglala and Mohawk, and my father's a full-blooded Hungarian Slovak gypsy. So I call myself a hybrid love story. It's a little bit about me. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Our goals is just to provide basic understanding of all of the systems that trafficking can come and be rooted and seeded from, and that it's a form of sexual violence against Native people from within our communities and outside our communities. Oh, before I continue, and I apologize, I am grateful in front of every elder that's allowing me to speak before you today. Thank you, we'll do that for that. And also, I hope this covers some 101 basic, newcomer knowledge for new advocates, but I hope it's robust enough that folks that have been doing trafficking work probably longer than I have, that hopefully we get to have some discussion and you can add things into the chat too to contribute your experience and expertise. Okay, so one of the other things I wanted to give as housekeeping, the language, the real language on the street, the real language used can be rugged and uncomfortable. So I'll try to keep a lid on it to a certain degree, but a part of the learning is understanding the language that's used out there in the world, how pimps and johns, how they're talking to the survivors and victims themselves. So you're going to hear a couple swear words. I promise I'm not swearing at you, but it is the language used that I just want you to know along the way, because this is the language that you'll understand survivors when they come into your programs, your shelters, counseling, nurses' office, clinics, IHS, all of the things, right? So we want to define trafficking, that it is violence. There are debates. I'm going to keep it real. We do have not a division, but we have 2 different baskets in trafficking versus sex work. There are folks that are into decriminalizing sex trafficking and sex work. Full decrim to eliminate all of the unrealistic, huge amounts of folks that are arrested and taken off the street and charged for that. So they want to end that, but then there's the other camp that wants a partial decriminalization. So we're getting the buyers and we're getting the sellers.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but would that partial decriminalization be like the Nordic model?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification.
Yes, that's awesome. So there's a lot of debating going on, but at the end of the day, just like in domestic violence, just like in sexual violence, we can't be re-victimizing survivors and victims if they have been coerced and groomed and taken against their will and having to do these acts of sex, labor, and exploitation. So we'll get into the definitions more, but yeah, that's a big thing. There's World Without Exploitation. I'm going to drop it in the chat. If you'd like to learn more about the decrim, I'll give you a link for that. They have wonderful resources to kind of talk about the nooks and crannies of that. We also want to talk about trauma-informed. 1 minute, sorry. It's like working from home, you know how it goes. Out of provide guidance on trauma-informed language while also giving you the real language that's used on the street that you might hear when people begin disclosing. So recognizing that sex trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry of exploitation and enslavement, and it does target every spectrum of the human world. It's not just girls, it's not just boys, it includes the LGBTQ, gender identity, and people of all ages. It also does include the disabilities community, and that's something we're seeing a lot more of is deaf and hard of hearing, disabilities, other accessibility barriers become opportunities for the opportunists that are grooming and recruiting from all walks of life. We're going to also talk about warning signs in our communities, and I'll give you some storytelling advocacy of maintaining confidentiality, but Indian country is a very interesting target for a lot of different reasons. We'll talk about that. And then also identify and share services. What are you doing in the field? What are your TA needs? And what kind of strategies are you doing to build those relationships on the street with the survivors and victims that are there? How are you connecting? And that's really a big part of doing this work together. Yeah. Okay, there we go. So here's some difference. So prostitution. Again, this is debatable language, but we're just giving all forms of life here. Any exchanging of sex for food, money, housing, transportation, safety, visiting children or family, and drugs, alcohol, and favors. One of the examples of prostitution into trafficking in that example, the word food. So one of our coworkers, we'll get into this more later, did the Garden of Truth report, where there were 106 prostitutes or sex workers that came in, joined us, and we had conversations and did a research survey. And in one of those cases, that food, it was someone who was very hungry, and it was a pack of ramen noodles for the initial exchange. And then it went on to full-blown grooming and recruitment into actual sex trafficking. So a pack of ramen noodles was the entry. It's traffickers and sellers. They understand they're always looking for someone who's in a need. I'll help you. Get into this later more, but I'll give you what you need. I'll pay your mom's rent. And then it's you owe me. I helped you out. You owe me this. And then it goes into trafficking because they no longer, it's transactional. They can't leave. They can't escape. And they no longer get to keep the money that they've got. So sex trafficking, boom, recruitment, being a vulture for someone's need and coercing them into it. It's exploitation through harboring. Any transportation, I talked about those pipelines, obtaining a person for the purposes of commercial sex acts. And that is by definition, force and fraud and coercion. That's the difference between someone who's in prostitution that's making I statements in the consent world of the debate of the community of folks that say, I am a sex worker and that's my identity, happens. And then sex trafficking is also performed that has not attained the age of 18. When it comes to under the age of 18, it's trafficking, it's not prostitution, because youth cannot consent. So we'll get into that with Safe Harbor as well. Are there any questions so far? I get to talking fast. I'll say corrections. Okay, so the federal definition again, this is just blah blah, but you're going to get the PowerPoint, but I am going to read it for those that are on the phone. Apologies, but it is on your screen for others. So human trafficking, not sex trafficking, human trafficking in general is a crime that is exploiting a person for labor, right? You have labor trafficking, other acts of service like indentured servitude and commercial sex. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act of the year 2000 and its subsequent reauthorizations define trafficking as a commercial sex act, again, through force and fraud and coercion. Again, has to be over the age of 18 or has not attained the 18 years of age. Also, the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, and obtaining a person of labor or services, again, through force, fraud, and coercion for the purpose of subjection and involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. So Safe Harbor, what is Safe Harbor? It protects you. And there has been reauthorizations to this as well. I believe currently there are 36 states that have Safe Harbor laws. And what does it mean? The Safe Harbor law protects youth. They are considered sexually exploited and trafficked if they engage in any commercial sex activity. That means they should not be arrested. They should be protected and provide services to. They also added sexually exploited youth into the Minnesota Child Protection Codes, which is something to check on your tribal codes or your state to see where your Safe Harbor law is growing, is it changing and adapting to the times. And then increasing the penalties against the actual criminals, the convicted purchasers, the people that are selling and buying. Those are the abusers, not the victims and survivors of trafficking. And then victim-centered statewide response for the sexually exploited youth. And that means programs and services. So one of the other things that changed is the definition of delinquent child. It resolves the conflict that defines in law that a sexually exploited youth is both a victim and or a delinquent. If youth do engage in conduct that relates to being hired or offering to be hired or agreeing to be hired by another individual to engage in sexual contact, they cannot be charged for a crime for that act. But we know who needs to be charged, and that's something that we need to keep working on in that partial or full decrim. That always is in effect. That's where our priority should be. So here's an example for the state of Minnesota. Again, I know we're from all walks of life across Turtle Island and Indian country, but an example in Minnesota, they implemented No Wrong Door, making available resources for exploited children or youth to include regional navigators. They offer housing and shelter, wraparound and comprehensive services, and then training and protocol development for intersecting services and advocates. So they did make a wonderful change. Even though the legal age of adulthood is 18 are still considered youth. They're still growing and maturing into this world and may need support in the services and housing, getting employment, like adulting up, right? So they did change that individuals 24 and younger have the eligibility for services instead of just ending it at 18. Boom, you're an adult, now you can be arrested. And that's pretty great too. Trafficking and other forms of violence. So this is really basic. Sex trafficking intersects with everything. Child abuse, other acts of sexual violence, and domestic violence. What else does it intersect? Oh yeah. Did someone want to chime in? Okay. If you'd like to chime in, I will not be offended. You can interrupt me at any time and just unmute or put your video on or add to the chat. It's fine. Okay, so we have a question here. Hello, Andrea. Do you find as an advocate in Minnesota, I'm in Pennsylvania, but we do have other folks here. Are there enough shelter spaces to meet the demand of those exiting? Does anyone in Minnesota want to chime in with that? What is the current shelter roster and availability? Anyone? Okay, we can, I'm gonna give an email. You can also chat me and we can look into that if you need support. And in that question, we can do that too offline, maybe after the presentation's done. It can spend some time with you and we can find what you're looking for. And other types of violence, that sex trafficking, you know, mental health, substance abuse, housing, homelessness, runaway homeless youth, murdered and missing, like sex trafficking intersects everywhere at all times. It's an intersection that's very unfortunate because domestic violence can turn into trafficking. Sexual exploitation and sexual violence can turn into long-term trafficking. Long-term trafficking can result in PTSD and emotional and physical and spiritual health. So the intersections are just robust. So I had talked about Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition's Garden of Truth report. This was very progressive. This is about 10 years old, I believe. And I remember when it came out, it was just like, oh my goodness, yes, because we were doing all this DV work and sexual violence work. And all of a sudden, the sex trafficking work started bubbling up and become a part of our language in this movement. I don't want to read through all of the examples. We will provide the Garden of Truth report into the chat space for you. It's a great read if you're interested in prostitution and trafficking. It really talks about more of the intersections. Or I'll just go through the first few. 79% of the individuals we interviewed and talked to, 79% were abused as children, with an average of 4 perpetrators. 2/3 had family who attended boarding school, so also intergenerational trauma. 92% had been raped, 84 physically assaulted, and 72 had traumatic brain injuries. So this is a very dangerous world. Domestic violence is, of course, too, sexual violence, murdered and missing, obviously. This has such long-term effects and other forms of violence too. So that's where that trauma-informed care comes in, that we're never judging in our advocacy. We're understanding that many of these survivors, when they finally get to you in your space where you can support them, that gentle love and traditional values are very important. And Ashton, sorry, it's my dog. It's like ocean violation. Okay, so what are the parallels? We talked a little bit about this too, with trafficking versus other forms of abuse. Oftentimes that domestic violence is a heavy intersection because that's a part of the grooming. Baby, 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 I love you. If you'll do this, and if you love me, you'll do it again. Baby, baby, baby. We've been together for so long. I paid your mom's rent. I bought you food. I've really, if you do this, I'll get you a modeling gig, or, you know, all the things, all these weird examples, but it's based often on the theory that that is your man or your person, your love, your partner, and they're abusing you. And that's the psychological exploitation that is a part of it, which can lead to PTSD for a lifetime of future relationships if that traditional healing isn't happening. With an abuse survivor believes, apologies for the pronouns. I'm going to make an edit to this because we know that this is the way we do, but believes that the person that they are with are true to them. A pimp puts their needs over the survivor or victim's needs. Same thing with abuse. Oh yeah, if the pimp saves them, and I'm good, baby, I treat you well, I only hurt you sometimes, or I make you do this, but I love you, you're doing it for us, we can have this big future together. It's not always all violence, it's that psychological trauma. Same thing with abuse survivors. Also attempting to leave and having nowhere to go, right across the board, very similar. Threats, if we leave, we know our safety planning, working with survivors and victims of all kinds of abuse. It can be holding passports, your driver's license, birth certificates, or holding an animal. Oh, no way. Sorry, my computer just decided to its own thing. With animals too, they can hold animals or children or parents hostage. And we do know about tribal retaliation that quite often in many abuse relationships, threats to friends and family or home or your car is a real truth too. Full disclosure, this is a storytelling moment and it is a graphic, but I'll keep it as gentle as possible while telling the truth. There was someone who was being abused and trafficked and sexually assaulted and tried to leave. When they did leave, they were the family, the home was burnt down, and then there was a violence with lead pipes just because she was leaving, and this was extended family that their house was burnt down. All the things happen. When it comes to a pimp's coin and his paper, that is another layer in addition to domestic violence, sexual violence, all the things. A drug dealer can obtain and sell drugs, but it's finite. They run out and they have to get more. And that's money, criminal conspiracy and corruption and illegal activities for their paper. When it comes to a human being is infinite. It's not finite. They can sell over and over and over again. So that's why a lot of people do transition from other forms of crime, like drug dealing, and transition into this weird mental strategic scheme that a human is over and over and over again, which is just more paper and more money in their pocket. And that's why they're so psychologically and physically abused, to keep them in line so they don't try to run. So that was a lot, but thank you for listening. And that's where losing family and friends come in. Sometimes it's because the survivor is trying to protect their family, knowing if they leave, it's a tiny res, and they try to leave, everybody knows everybody, right? So the threats can be very real. Grooming tactics. So we talked about this a little bit too. Baby, 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 the sweet talking, the I love you, that dating, that emotional, psychological trauma and abuse and trickery. It's like, he told me it's a trickster. They try to trick with the love bombing and building them up, and just to have 8 other individuals in, it's called a kennel, which would be the location where a pimp keeps their people, their trafficking victims. So it makes the person feel special. Recruiting and grooming can be like, I'll buy you phones and clothes and this and that and the other, all as part of that grooming, to keep that relationship built. And then the psychological traumas and exploitation can happen over time. It's not just being scooped up off the street, like the movie Taken. Token acts of kindness, offering a safe place to stay, true love, again, with substance abuse and addiction is another huge one. Keep someone addicted that, they want the drugs, their body goes into withdrawal, so it becomes a transactional, a planned transaction that never benefits the survivor or victim. Help me pay the bills, baby, 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 do it just once, or violence, help me pay the bills. It's just, it goes both ways. Do it this one time, you owe me, that ramen noodle pack, now you owe me. I helped you, I gave you a place to stay, now you have to. It's very scary, living, existing under the oppression of a trafficker who all they care about is their coin and their money. The isolation that comes with that, just like domestic violence, part of that is grooming. And recruitment too. And the intimidation is a part of recruitment and grooming. Also that gaslighting thing, right? Tells the person they're crazy, stupid, ugly, no one wants you, no one even knows where you are. That's huge. I like to story tell on that too, because I think our tribal experiences are really important to weave in. Man camps. Many of us do know what man camps are. There's big oil refineries and fracking and rigging. So we have man camps that have popped up. A decade now, I think man camps were really big up north, out west and up north, and they were popping up. There were trailers and little shanty towns with no streets, no names, just popped up in a field. 12,000 workers that are making money working in oil rigs or driving their trucks. Well, these were on and around reservations. So that's where that hunting the res comes in. So they would coerce, groom, pretend to date, and this is factual, these were young girls and women, and then bring them into the man camp. And then they would be trafficked within the man camp, not knowing where they were, had no means to escape, locked and sometimes chained in those shanties or the trailers, like, campers and whatnot. And then the buyers would, so that happened. One day, one of the young women got a cell phone somehow out of a dude's pocket or something happened. And she called 911. But you know what she said? I don't know where I am. They couldn't find her. There was no way for her to be located because there were no actual roads. They were living in the middle of a man camp in the field. So that's part of the issues of knowing where you are when it comes to tribal nations and man camps. That's different than being in a city. You can at least say I'm on this street and this street. With man camps in the middle of the field. It was a horrible experience. And it was really difficult for tribal police as well, because they have such a huge landmass, and the infrastructure of the tribe or the town was not ready to have 12 to 40,000 new people in their community when you have like 4 cops. So that, it's all relative to where we are. The emotional and verbal abuse is constant. Also the emotional, psychological abuse, that intersection right there with the I love you and then the physical abuse. Also in grooming, the not structure, the words, you got to deal with what the sellers want, no matter how violent that could be. And I won't get graphic, but that's a part of their, excuse the language, job requirement, is to accept whatever happens in the exploitation moment. Some pimps are offer some sort of protection, if that can even be said, that they'll defend them to a degree, but in general, it's just, it can be really bad because the fetishes exist out there that are really uncomfortable and unfortunate and violent. Pornography, that's a big one. We can get into this later, but COVID has changed the game in trafficking and grooming. Not that digital pornography and, I think it was Backpage back in the day, sex trafficking was always happening online. It's been happening since the internet started. It's not in the dark web either. It's right in front of our faces. It's happening on Twitter. It's happening on Facebook, Instagram, all the places. There are recruiters constantly recruiting. So the pornography piece, when it came to COVID and there weren't as many people on the streets and people were sheltering in place and kids were not in school, it just changed the game. That recruiters went from recruiting on the streets and in schoolyards and all the places, they just went online and started hunting the res online for Native children, including connecting online. This is another storytelling. Connecting online with a teenage girl on a reservation about 90 minutes from a big city. Build a relationship, honey, 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 come to the city, get all of your friends, and y'all should run away. We'll come pick you up and take you to the city. It'll be fun, he said. It actually happened. The young woman recruited, and a bunch of young teenagers were taken and then trafficked in the big city. And some made it home and others didn't get back. But that online piece is a huge part of trafficking. Another piece of that is due to COVID. I know we're still in the middle of it, but when we were sheltering in place, it also changed the game for the amount of money, coin and paper sellers were getting. So they doubled down. So they were forced and exploited to work in real life, face to face with the Johns and the buyers, and then had to do a second shift, for lack of a better word, that they had to also make money online by doing OnlyFans or have digital sex shows, which is still trafficking 100%. It's a violation and exploitation. So that is still, that I don't know that that flame has been lit and it's not going away anytime soon. So when you're doing your advocacy, we have to be doing the work in real life, but we also have to do the work online, right? Okay. So this, this is like the wheels. We know the wheels for DV and SA, same, all of this applies. Spiritual and emotional affects dissociation, fear and distrust of folks, inability to be close to others or get close, even to protect them. We can, lean back from family. The scarlet letter, just being called names by your own community that know you're being trafficked, don't intervene, and then all the ugly words we get labeled with. And people that either stop sex work or escape trafficking. Our communities can be so gossipy and so harsh. And that's where our advocacy comes in, that gossip and the moccasin trail is dirty, and we can't allow that to continue happening, even in other weird stuff in our life that we gossip sometime. And at the end of the day, that goes to the next level. It goes to the next level. That can be re-victimizing for folks if we allow names to be called to survivors on any level ever. Suicidal ideation is another spiritual mental component. It is not easy to escape trafficking. Like we just talked about, that scarlet letter in our community isn't always either have the infrastructure or the compassionate traditional values to put our arms around someone and support them and love them and allow them to go to the next level on their healing journey. That ends suicidal ideation. It's love and compassion and bravery and all of the, the core values to our tribal ways. With the loss of self-worth, that's why we do love and compassion. Difficulties fitting in. The PTSD of sex trafficking is much like a veteran returning from war or domestic violence. It's very difficult to just feel, to get back into that normalcy. There's a survivor leader, she calls herself, and she's gone through some of the most horrific things I've ever heard, and she's a trainer for us, so hopefully you'll get to meet her and hear her speak with MIWSAC staff too. She's wonderful. But she talked about how difficult it was just to transition and develop a healthy relationship, how to seek medical treatment when every time she went through horrific things and she would go to the hospital, they treated her badly for her injuries because they called her names and you're a prostitute, but she was being trafficked and held against her will. So putting all of that and going through all of the healing journeys and the fact that she's able to speak on it so eloquently and openly, because she keeps it real, man. And she's amazing. Her name is Jessica Desmond Solomon, by the way. Can feel isolated, few friends when you're in a group or a kennel, or whether you're the only person that the seller is selling. Who do you trust? In that circle, you dare not escape, because the other individuals in this space will rat you out and then get bonuses. It's that trickery, the ectomy, right? Like you keep people pointed against each other, and then no one feels safe and secure to even have a friend in the kennel or in the home. Depression, anxiety, phobias, PTSD, they are being watched. It's not a feeling, they're always being watched, so they don't escape. And then the other thing, like this one's hard, damaged goods, right? I'm a survivor. I've been doing the work for 22 years, but I am a survivor. And that is that internal healing journey of feeling worthy, either to stand up and defend ourselves or say, yes, I deserve medical treatment. I deserve to have love in my life. I deserve to be treated with respect. That damaged good piece, I think many of us as advocates, we see that with victims and survivors. If you're a survivor, I think we all understand that too. And that's that empathy, like we know. And this is why we treat survivors so well. We try to. And then also avoidance of spiritual and cultural traditions. Again, damaged goods, not feeling worthy. I don't deserve to be in that space. That's a very real thing. So just that support, it's okay, come into it. And even in your programs, you can create that space. You can bring in a healer, you can do a beadwork circle, whatever that looks like, to enter that cultural healing into it is one of the most beautiful things about tribal programs. So yeah, keep doing that. Physical effects, I don't want to read all of these because it's the same with other acts of violence, including domestic and sexual violence. Broken bones, chronic pain, the traumatic brain injury, forced addiction, sexually transmitted diseases, and then chronic injuries from the violence, unwanted pregnancies. And, we know how our bodies are. We can go through a traumatic experience, and then it manifests somewhere in our aura, in our spirit, and it could be an elbow or chronic migraines, our knee. Outside of the physical actual injuries, it can just manifest. Sometimes it's a racing heart or being a nervous Nelly, having anxiety. It all comes out in different ways, depending on the individual and their healing journey. So youth, I had talked about that runaway teen pact. It was a recruiting plan and it worked, and it was very sad. But those older partners, they're recruiters a lot. So can your homegirls and your homeboys, or your thems, or your gang, the people you hang out with. There could always be a plant there. So we got to teach our youth what consent, no means no, yes means yes. Do you have an out? Are you traveling with your friend, a best friend, or a buddy system if you're going to a partner? When we get into gangs, that's a whole nother ball of wax. That's the organized crime. They're all gangs. Every sex trafficker is a criminal exploiting humans, and they're a part of a network of knowing who's on what block, who's on what reservation, what borders are a part of their territory. It is a network of corruption and gang-related organized crime. Truancy, that can be a sign. Worked with a couple of schools that they started working together across the different districts, because there were a couple of families where a youth would be trafficked by their parents or their grandparents, their own family, because it was a cyclical thing across generations. And they noticed that as soon as a youth would be in school, if they came to school, it would last so long until a friend, a teacher, a guidance counselor, or even teenage gossip, they would come to know that the child didn't look well, they were subdued or depressed, showed up with injuries or other signs of trafficking or abuse. And then the parent, as soon as anything tipped off, they would abandon the apartment or wherever they were living and move to a new school district. And that became a pattern to find these trafficking teenage victims and survivors, and also nail the trafficker. So little things like that can be a part of your work with your local school districts, to know the signs, to see them. And it's all going to be organized crime. It's always going to be organized. You just got to follow the breadcrumbs, because there's always a system in place to keep making that paper. Recruiting at school. So back in the day, it was tattoos and brands that a seller, a trafficker, would have their insignia. They'd have their logo, and they would have it tattooed here or a brand here. So where other traffickers knew that that person belonged to that trafficker. That's kind of old school. It doesn't still happen, yes, but now it's a bag, a certain design or color. It can be a hair clip, it can be an earring. They got very, as soon as we know what we're doing, they change the game. But that branding, meaning their logo, is something that is noticeable on the street by other traffickers and buyers. They know what symbol that means and who they're paying, who the money's going to go to. Sometimes it's how the victims are being treated, or those fetishes. Remember, we talked about fetishes too. A certain logo on a human being could mean that they are okay with us, not okay. They are forced to do a certain fetish flavor, for lack of a better word. So that's all part of the game, being in the life. With youth, this one's hard, but yeah, just paying attention to our youth in our communities, looking for sudden changes in daily activities. It could mean a lot of things, but if we're always watching and connecting with you, that's how we're going to do some intervention and prevention and let them know that they're not alone and they do not have to be forced into anything. Inappropriate age knowledge of sex or sexually transmitted disease. Man, anything that goes online, anywhere ever, never really goes away. So we need to keep teaching our youth that if our youth are being asked to pose or send pictures, it just never goes away. And that can be a part of the recruitment, which can be, like I said, on any platform, on email, text message, all the things. Assign also like those families that kept jumping home to home, kind of getting away from the school, who's kind of getting their number. Watching a house with frequent traffic. Maybe someone's really popular and they're doing visiting all the time. That's fine, but we can keep an eye out and have good relationships in our community. We know what to look for. Going missing with truancy for long periods of time too can be a sign. And then substance use, right? Warning signs for trafficking in adults, very similar. All of these can cross. There's no ageism when it comes to trafficking. It doesn't matter if you're Black, you're Native, you're Asian Pacific Islander, 70 or 7, right? It can happen online and face to face. But I'm not going to read all of this because it doesn't matter if it's an adult or a youth. One thing I do want to say though is the sex work, right? The strip clubs, sex shops, those can be inlets for sex trafficking too, including like massage parlors. They can be that slow roll grooming into starting here. And then they'll invest 2 years in one of their recruits before it actually gets to the act of sexual exploitation. Some of them slow burn and they invest and build that psychological relationship with them to get them to do it. But the strip clubs and sex shops do not always have trafficking, nor do massage parlors, but a lot of them do. And so that's just good to know. Possible signs to look in your community, man, casinos. Yes, those are pipeline stops more often than not. Also hotels, bars, restaurants, and homes. Rodeos, Super Bowl. Huge. I mean, that's one of the biggest money makers for sex traffickers is the freaking Super Bowl. So then we have the Indian Super Bowl, like the National Finals Indian Rodeo. That is covered, saturated with sex trafficking. And on our local levels, the casinos are too. So we want to keep an eye out and be working with your local casino. Have the parking garage attendants do a TA training, visit with them so they know what to look for and they can pick up on this person keeps coming and going. Then you can provide an intervention and maybe show up one day and just say, hey, how you doing? Right? Intervene in a very gentle, friendly way. Just say, when you're ready, I'm here for you, right? Sometimes it just takes a baby step. How else? Basketball tourneys, skate jams, all the things. Noticing unfamiliar people in your small community or your large community on your block, keep an eye out. Homes, well, I don't really like this bullet, homes with the windows covered. Yes, maybe every day, but if it's, dark ceremony, the windows are going to be covered. But just you're reading the room, you're reading your neighborhood, your neighbors. And then again, the massage, suspicious business fronts. Yeah. So outreach. Tried to weave that in as much as I could. You're advocates, you're professionals, you know what you're doing. How do we work together though? How do we share what's working in our community, whether you're up in Yakima and we got people down here in Louisiana and Puma or Biloxi tribe, or up here, Sasne, the Lenni Lenape, it doesn't matter. We have tribal communities. What's working in the Pacific Northwest might just have the perfect thing for someone down in Seminole, Florida. So how are we doing outreach where we're coming together like today's training and leaving with a big takeaway to do the networking? Who's doing sex trafficking in their dual SATV program? What shelters, if there's a sex trafficking shelter, there's not many, but there are a few. Doing some outreach, and if you, I'm giving my email, I'm happy to make those networking opportunities. I'm also happy to come in and do training and technical assistance with you if you're interested in kind of uplifting more of that sex trafficking intersection with your SEND programs. But we need to do that in general. We need to do it with IHS, the medical clinics, dentists, the schools, your faith community. Work with your medicine men and your healers. Talk about it. Keep an eye on each other. That outreach is important because we're peers working together, and we're going to make change with that. So be creative with the events, right? We know how to table, we know how to bend. We've got this, right? So maybe weave in materials when you're doing a tabling event at a powwow or a conference. Have something on sex trafficking there right beside your domestic violence and sexual violence or murdered and missing work. Are you going to provide community outreach and resources for substance abuse? Have a little brochure or a fact sheet about sex trafficking and where someone can call. Most likely someone's just gonna, slip it, put it in their pocket and save it for a friend or family member, or maybe even themselves. Connecting with police and law enforcement, your courts, your tribal councils, man, whether it's traditional or political. Schools, clinics, I'm not going to go through the list. Just contact everyone everywhere that makes sense in your community where you see an intersection might happen. Collaborations. Social service programs, and always be culturally informed for the survivors that are coming into your program, given that we have these values of love, compassion, and bravery and wisdom, and like allowing them to say the words and define it as they intend it, because almost never is someone going to come in, and I'm not trying to joke here, make jokes, but no one's going to walk in and say I'm a sex trafficking victim. You got to read signs. I've been in a relationship that I really want to get out of, but I can't. And then you're thinking, okay, that's DV. Well, the next questions in those slow burn conversations may not be domestic violence at all. They could be held captive or exploited or in a sex trafficking relationship where it has nothing to do with DV. Not on an actual scale. So in advocacy, you already know this stuff, right? We want to be patient and kind. We want to be traditional valued, offer traditional healing opportunities. Like, it's my job. As soon as someone comes in to smudge, just in general, allow time and trust building. Like I said, it could be 1 day or 1 hour before someone that you understand how to ask the right questions with the survivor to understand that, wait, this isn't sexual violence and DV, this is trafficking. It could take 6 months of working with an individual before they actually make that connection with you to trust that that you're going to be there for them and you mean it. And you have the right resources and access, because it's hard to do sex trafficking advocacy and services if we don't actually have anything made for them in our programs or have access to other programs around that can talk the talk and walk the walk and provide what needs to happen with the sex trafficking survivor. You can't just do the work without the foundation, right? Again, if you'd like support with that, I'm happy to help. Recognizing the fears of how incredibly dangerous it is for a corrupt exploiter to have their money taken from them. And like I said, a human being can be sold over and over and over again. The danger is very real for people getting out of the life. Usually, this is the bad language, elders, so sorry, but I'm going to keep it real so you know the language. There's the trafficker and there's a bottom bitch. The bottom bitch is not a bottom, right? They're the top. That's the right-hand person. That is the one who keeps the kennel in line. They're often very, very abusive. So the trafficker, like, they have their lieutenant, say man, but they do the dirty work. They do a lot of the recruiting. And as that structure keeps building, that bottom will recruit her second in command. And then you got 10 people recruit, and 4 of them are doing that, or 8 are doing the actual sex work, and other people are out there recruiting. So it is a corrupt system, and it's very strategic. It is a business plan. So recognizing their fears, that the sellers know who they are surrounded by people that can't be trusted, even though they're in the same kennel or home, and traffickers know traffickers. So if a trafficker sees their business associate from 2 blocks over, and they see a survivor going in and out of a hospital, a medical clinic, service program, they can let the trafficker know. And then that bottom could, give a lot of violence, retaliation. So those fears are all very real. A lot of the reason folks don't leave is because of the fear of isolation. You have nowhere to go. You have no money because they don't get to keep their own money often, almost always. They get a little allowance sometimes. And, how am I going to work a regular job? How am I going to heal? How am I going to escape? How am I going to heal? Where am I going to go? And a lot of folks, either their family are their traffickers, or they've already done so much damage, or they're afraid for their family's safety to leave. So the fears are so robust. When we have access to develop that relationship and building trust and time built relationship building, we have to have services and options ready. We need to be ready for when you walk in that door. It's already going to be hard AF for them to do what they're about to do. I can't express that enough. And then prosecution, right? They get arrested. They're the ones that get arrested, the survivors and the victims. That's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, supporting them along the journey, having access in that network, that foundation I talked about. What is the law clinic? Do you have access to low income? Are there any pro bono? And I know that sounds like a pipe dream, but we have to have legal services just beside the shelter and housing and the medical treatment, the prosecution. That's a huge thing we need to also be robustly supporting. Having children taken away from them, that's a tool that's used often, and we know that through other intersections. Having their family finding out, having the community finding out, and then that gossip, that talking-ish. Focus on actions, not the person, right? Without judgment, just with love and understanding. That's really important. Snaps, do not judge. I'm going to shut up. It's important to check our own biases, right? This is something we have to get involved in our own Changleshka, our medicine wheel. Do we have biases? Are we a little judgy? Is that, even though we don't intend to, we could hear stories where like, you did that? Like, we're humans. We're going to have biases and fears and our own responses based on our work for ourselves, so we can do better work for our folks that need our help. I know we could do a whole 8-hour session on that. So language is powerful. Some people prefer victim. I've heard that, right? So I just say victim and survivor because I'm just trying to honor the voices, man, of things that have been told to me. So a survivor or victim. Society views them as criminals and yucky names, all that judginess, or sexually promiscuous. Like, yeah, they chose that, right? Even if they consented for sex worker, but if they consented and entered into that life, and then they had protection, air quotes, they had protection or a system in place by going with the trafficker, and then all of a sudden they can't leave. It started out being consensual and end up being consensual. So that's the defining moment when consent has been totally revoked from your vocabulary and your opportunity. We do understand the transfer and how things can change that way. We don't judge them forever consenting. Survivors may not identify that they engaged in trafficking at all. That may be a revelation that comes 6 days later, 6 years later, and it has happened. Survivors and victims can carry a lot of shame and feel disconnected from their culture. Again, that worthiness, we want to build folks up that they are worthy and help reconnect them and reassure them that they are welcome into their culture, into ceremony and all the spaces. And if you hear gossip and someone being unwelcoming, nip that in the bud. It's not okay. Basic needs. We went through all of this already. We need to have a foundation of our work if we want to walk the journey of providing services to sex trafficking. It's going to be more than a brochure for this training right now, but it's a great place to start to plant the seeds, and the roots will go deep, grow the thing, but it has to provide all the basic needs that are going to be required, because they're not the same needs as domestic violence or sexual violence. Well, communities that experience increased depression, Native communities, do I need to make the list? I know I don't. We know why traffickers are hunting the risk. Jurisdiction, poverty, rural isolation. A lot, Pine Ridge is 90 miles from Rapid. It's not easy to get a job. Traffickers they understand every vulnerability, every access point of vulnerability. And that's what they exploit in order to exploit the person. Other communities of color, the Native LGBTQ and Two-Spirit community, sex trafficking is such a dangerous environment for that community. And it does exist a lot. So we want to be inclusive when we're building that foundation to be working for sex trafficking victims and survivors. You can't do that unless you're going to include the Native LGBTQ and Two-Spirit and disabilities and access and abilities and deaf and hard of hearing. Got to be equal opportunity, love, and compassion, right? Because they're often invisible. Sometimes programs just aren't made to be inclusive, but I challenge you all to do that every time, all the time. Okay, so this is what we're talking about, change making, and I really hope you all need some TA and training, and I hope I can come and do a virtual session with you all sometime or answer any questions, because educating ourselves, and you never stop. I still go to every conference I can, go to every workshop I can, and I'm 22 years in, still learning, because the game is changing. COVID changed the game in trafficking. We're never fully graduated. We're just constantly learning. So educating ourselves is a continual thing. And we want to be educated enough so survivors don't have to walk in the door and explain the stuff to us, right? We need to be ready for them. They don't need to educate us about trafficking. You know what I mean? Acknowledge the invisibility they may be feeling in their community, in their culture, their families, or just from everyone in the world who has not intervened in any opportunity. We want to center those that can be targeted first and do it authentically and meaningful and culturally, right? We want to give them that traditional love. Shift the focus to the person who thinks it's okay to buy or sell sex, not the individual that's been exploited. That's the decrim and partial crim, and there's some debates. They're rugged, and I choose not to have an opinion. I just choose to sit in the middle and just support everybody, because people who are doing sex work, they are saying I statements. This is how I feel. This is how I am living my life. Who am I to tell them, oh no, I'm an advocate, you're wrong? Or a survivor who says, no, all sex work is bad and it's based on oppression. Yes, I agree with that 100. So we have to also be respectful of the shifting focus between consent and non-consent. But it is all based on oppression. That I do not doubt, but women have been oppressed since the beginning of time. So as well as other identities as well. Anyway, we want to shift the focus to the person who thinks it's acceptable to buy. That includes law enforcement. We need to start arresting the right people, not survivors or victims or sex workers. Host community discussions, get this on the table. There's the saying I heard, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So if we're having board meetings, roundtable community talks, if sex trafficking survivors and ending exploitation isn't on the table to be discussed, that means it's on the menu out there in our communities. Don't let that happen. Bring it up. Say, how do we start this, or how can we do better? How can we provide services? Just talk about it. And talk about it with the community. It's a community, they know more than we do. They're in it. It's grassroots. Work together in that collaboration. Actively restore cultural identity and values and customs all the time. And then there might be some policy people in the room. What are the tribal codes for sex trafficking? Are there any? Do you need an example for tribal codes for sex trafficking? reached out to me. My email's coming soon. Right there's. Okay, I'm gonna take a breath and a sip of water. And I'm just gonna open it up for some questions. Anyone want to story tell, maintaining confidentiality and share with the group? Or anything like that?
Rebecca, this is Ashley. I was just wondering if the term survival sex is still being used. I often heard it associated with LGBTQ two-spirit community before, but I haven't heard it in a while.
I think it could still be used. Yeah. Survival sex would also be another definition to trafficking and exploitation. Yeah. I haven't heard it in a long time, but yeah, I'm sure it's still what. So you're wondering if it's still being used in the world or if it's still acceptable or just in general?
Yeah, I guess still acceptable because I haven't heard it in so long, but a lot of times it was used when talking about the LGBTQ two-spirit youth community and like being kicked out of their home. And I think it got more associated with that because it was being a child that needs to survive.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a wonderful tip for folks to understand what that means and who it's associated with. And yes, safe harbor. I applaud you and your work. Find your safe harbor navigators wherever you are. Build that relationship. The access and opportunities are amazing. That you don't have to, start things from scratch. That you have access. Thank you. And there's also a quick note. Youth as young as 11 and fifth graders are receiving sex education in communities and schools, which is wonderful. And it's just really great to teach the actual language, penis, vagina, vulva, intercourse, and a red flag would be slang that's used, phrases for sex and graphic phrases not typically used in sexual health programs. And that's also watching that age appropriateness too, for some of that language could be a red flag. Yeah. You're welcome. Any other thoughts or questions? One of the things we do now, domestic violence, we're doing a lot of work. The world, our movement, all of you, all of our field and our change makers, a lot of work being done. Sexual violence, a lot of work being done. For Indian country, this is not 100 years old doing the work. We're still growing access for our tribal communities of all shapes and sizes, including urban, right? Sex trafficking is not a service that is available everywhere. We need to find a way to make that in line, that there isn't a hierarchy of DV, then SA, then murdered and missing, and then sex trafficking. Somehow we need to build this cohesive Changleshka, the medicine wheel, 4 quadrants that are intersecting in the intersections. So I do urge you to keep on learning and asking questions and finding that network so that no one walks in that door and misses out on an opportunity to heal. Thank you. That's all I got. Wokula Tankta, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Christine. And my email's there if you'd like it. Thank you. Wokula.
Thank you so much, Rebecca.
You are so welcome.
All right. Okay, so I dropped a link to the Garden of Truth, which is a report that MIWSAC had done with 105 Native women used in prostitution, and Rebecca referenced it at the beginning of the module there. So if you were interested in checking that out, there's also all kinds of information, literature review, other pieces of information out there that it's always good to know what's happening out there. And then, oh, Andrea's not on anymore. But I don't think there's ever enough shelter space to meet the demand, right? It's always tough to find a space for somebody. So our advocacy, you know, can be to continue to do that searching, you know, or to find creative solutions in other ways too, right? And kind of following their lead. What direction do they want to take it? Okay. All right, folks. Let's go ahead and take a break. It's 10 after 2, yeah, or 2 o'clock my time. So let's come back at 25, is that right? 25 minutes after the hour. And we'll jump into our Two-Spirit, advocacy for Two-Spirit, folks. All right. Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so go get some snacks, get your water, take a little walk, take a breather, stretch it out. These are always hard conversations to have. So thank you for sticking with us, and we'll see you in 15 minutes, all right? Okay. I'm gonna pause the recording here to resume.
So
And-
thank
know,
you
I
for
was-
sharing those cultural customs and practices.
Are you able to share your screen?
I'm getting it. Hold on a second. I have to.
And was
What am I-
somebody saying something? I didn't mean to interrupt.
Sorry, I didn't either mean to interrupt. A lot of the people we work with are seriously have a good sense of humor. And Zoom has a mind of its own today because I got on and my picture is changed. I'll show you. That's my picture. And Christine said it looks like a tribal council.
You could be up on the wall at the casino.
Yeah, with the tribe. I think that's really funny. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. And did you explain about the recording
Oh,
that you're going to send?
I didn't, but I can. So go ahead, you can.
We had our former co-worker, Amanda Watson, who now works for Praxis. We contracted with her and she created a PowerPoint and a presentation really for our 40-hour that was for the LGBTQ Two-Spirit module. It's kind of long, so we want to be able to share that with you, but also what we're going to do is we're going to go through the module that we had previously created.
Did the frame freeze or is it just me? This is Linnell.
Hi, Linnell. I think Linda froze. While she gets back on, her internet has been a little bit spotty today. But I can just add that we had Amanda record this module, and Amanda identifies as two spirits. So it's coming from a person that is, so, you know, myself, I don't identify as LGBTQ or two spirit. Linda does not. So we wanted to provide, oh, you're back. We wanted to provide an opportunity for, hold on. Gonna get you back in here. Oh, something, it does something to the spotlights. I don't know what. Hello, Linda. The link says I need access to the.
I've lost my spotlight too, Christine. I don't see you on one either.
Okay. Spotlight. Okay, we got. And then Hannah. It's not letting me, it's making me make a choice between
Yeah.
spotlight and pinning.
Yeah, I think it's only letting two people be spotlit at the same time, which is kind of odd. I don't know why it's Zoom really is doing its own thing.
It is, it is. But you'll be able to, when you hand off to Hannah, you'll be able to spotlight her. Okay.
Yeah, we can just replace spotlights then.
And then Linda's just gone. Linda has to log back in, I believe. Okay, so we can just kind of keep going forward until she gets back in. So yeah, so since, you know, the people on staff right now don't identify as LGBTQ or Two-Spirit, we wanted to do a both and, right? So offer a first person perspective. And then also, you know, we'll still go through the module because there's useful information in there, but we recognize that without it being, you know, something that we personally identify with, our information may not be as accurate. And we didn't want to miss an opportunity to share the both and not the either or, right? And I will go back and make sure that that video is accessible to folks. I see your link in there, Ashley. Or that your question about the link. Okay, she's still not back. So we'll try to keep going here. I'll share my screen. Doesn't type, Amber. Okay, can you see our Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland? I'll just say that again, our Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland. Oh, that's amazing. Pleases me to no end to say that. So, you know, now I have to move all my stuff out of here. So this graphic says everything for me, right? So Deb said that I'm a proud mom of a queer daughter who very candidly told me she didn't come out formally because she felt that she shouldn't have to. Straight people don't have to come out, she said. She made a good point. Today is about being proud of who you are. I look forward to the day when no one has to come out anymore because everyone is visible and loved. And she was a congresswoman at that time. Oh, Linda's texting me. Oh, she has I think her community is doing something with their 911 system. So she may not be able to make it back. So we'll just go forward if that's okay. Yep, technology's given us a run for our money today. I kept cutting out too. I thought I was getting booted off and then I was showing up, but I was still here. So who knows what's going on. Okay, so I will make sure that I double check that link so you can watch that video recording. They just do a really brilliant job of delivering the information. So I encourage you to watch that if you get a chance, okay? And my apologies if I say something or do something wrong or incorrect because, you know, I can just get things wrong, plain and simple. Right? So what do we need to know? So the goal is to prepare new advocates and volunteers to provide effective and inclusive advocacy for LGBTQ, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, queer, two-spirit individuals. You know, there's a lot of terminology that is ever evolving, right? And so our role as an advocate is to self-educate, right? So we don't have to have them train us on things. The more that we can do our own research and be up to speed, the stronger our advocacy can be. Right? Becoming familiar with best practices for providing inclusive and affirming services, honoring the history of Two-Spirit folks in Indian country, identify some unique barriers to safety, and then identifying effective advocacy strategies. Okay? So there's a long history, you know, of course, Two-Spirit folks or LGBTQ folks have been around since the dawn of time. They've always been with us. It never used to be, at least in my understanding, there was never a distinction, right? And I think it's important for us to note that since the dawn of time, everybody has had a role in the family, in the community, in the clan system, in our Tioshpaye, in the Pueblo, right? And so it wasn't a distinct way of being, but what it is there's a spiritual piece to it, right? That has always been acknowledged in our own way, but because of, you know, the impact of colonization and all the pillars of oppression, you know, now we have fear and homophobia and all the things that go with a colonial mindset, right? So some folks on here may be very familiar and some folks may not be familiar. So we'll just kind of go through it as we go, right? So the term refers to American Indian or Alaska Native, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender individuals. So it was adopted in 1990 at an international Native gay and lesbian gathering. So, you know, they were gathering and they said, you know, what if we don't identify as gay or identify as lesbian? And so they had a conversation amongst themselves about, you know, how do they want to identify? And so they selected this term Two-Spirit. So there's been a lot of conversation out there about, you know, who can use the term Two-Spirit. And, you know, in our advocacy, we really want to have the person self-identify, but we also want to acknowledge that cultural appropriation happens and address that. So it is a Native term, and you know, if a non-Native person is using that term, there may be some advocacy needed to interrupt that, okay? It's embodying characteristics of both genders in a single person, so making them a more whole human being. But also there are some tribes who think that it's inappropriate or not accurate to say two spirits. And so we would always just listen to the survivor. So it depends on geographically where you're from, you know, what the teachings are for your people. There's also tribes that have many genders, you know, 8 or 12 genders. So it's going to be different for every tribal nation. And we just talked about that there's a long history of Two-Spirit folks having important roles in our community. And we're kind of learning now, and it's becoming more, the information is more readily available than it ever has been, you know, because of social media, because of advocacy, just trying to address, you know, the fear and the homophobia and the colonialism and just being present, right? I'm sure folks have heard, my sister is filling me in on the Kamloops powwow. You know, they put some pretty stringent rules that were very oppressive and harmful. And, you know, the community is rising up to say it's harmful and unkind and inappropriate to exclude all of our people. So be thinking about language, you know, our words are very powerful, right? most languages have a word, you know, for folks, and then sometimes they don't, because we're just people, right? Everybody's just a person. And we kind of just talked about this, that result of assimilation and colonization policies. We have incorporated or internalized some of these fears and misunderstandings, right? So making sure that we're checking our own assumptions and biases, right? And the use of language, right? Be thinking about how your brochures are reading. I don't have any with me, but what does the language look like in our brochures, right? Rebecca had acknowledged that a lot of our PowerPoints are outdated, right? It's using really gender specific language. And so what we're trying to do as an organization is start seeing it and noticing it and addressing it, right? In the way that we speak, the way that we write, all the information, it has power, right? And so we want to make sure that our information reflects that inclusivity, that safe place that people can come and get advocacy no matter who we are. Right? So this is, there's a lot of different graphics out there, right? But this is something that if you're unfamiliar, it just is a fun little graphic to kind of look at, to kind of make a distinction. You know, our gender identity can be different than our gender expression, right? Our gender identity or gender expression can be different than our sex assigned at birth, right? Who we're physically or emotionally attracted to, that can be different as well. And so, as you can see on this little graphic, we can be all along that gender identity spectrum, right? Female, male, any other gender, right? All across the spectrum can identify or express as feminine or masculine or anywhere on that spectrum, right? Our sex assigned at birth, I mean, that's a very colonial practice, right? To have to assign you a gender on your birth certificate. We never used to have to do that, right? But we have to do that here. So it can be really problematic as we age, grow up. And if we don't identify as the sex that we were assigned at birth, then what, right? And that can be problematic in terms of just living in the world. Right? So our advocacy can be to learn and to ask questions. And, you know, when we're doing our core skills of advocacy, you know, to connect and understand, to ask questions. Oh, Amber got kicked out now. Zoom is giving us a run for our money today. Where is Amber, are you back? Okay, you're back.
Yeah, my whole thing froze, so I had to leave the meeting and I couldn't even, like, nothing was working, so.
I think that's what happened to Linda. She hasn't, I don't think she's back, right?
Not yet.
Oh,
Yes, I'm back.
Oh, wait, there she is. Yep.
Didn't you see my tribal council picture?
that's
I'm back.
all right.
I wouldn't trust me though, because I'm on my phone hotspot,
Okay.
but I'm good.
Okay. Well, do you want to, you can talk and I can flip the slides?
Sure, that would be fine
Right.
with that, as long as I can hang in there and you'll just pick it up if I fall again.
That's right. Okay.
So there is some confusion, and when you're first listening to this, or maybe there's many of you that can speak real easily on this topic on the gender spectrum. But there is definitions, and my sons always say that, you know, they're trying to subtly correct me or tell me when I'm not saying something correctly. So the only way we're going to learn is by keeping ourselves you know, connected to our relatives and connected to the people in the community, and creating space that we are inclusive of everybody. So there is the part where somebody is physically attracted to women or men or other genders, or they could be attracted to all or none. There is all of that along that spectrum. And then there's the other piece about being emotionally attracted. And it's the same as I just said about the physical attraction. Go ahead. Did you have something else to say about that? Here's several gender pronouns. And I suppose they have asked us, you know, when we're introducing ourselves in spaces, to have our pronouns available. And for a lot of us, it's on our business cards. It's in our, sometimes in the Zoom, you'll see somebody next to their name, they have their pronouns. But there's several here. And Christine has put this in the chat about why do they matter? The bottom line on all of this is just respect the person. It's not up to us to question and pull apart to make sure we understand. It starts and ends with us respecting another life and trying to be in present company. And, you know, just, I'm telling you, when people have been abused and there has been survival of many types of abuses, they're like ultra sensitive. So even the way you're staring at somebody or looking, you know, whatever it is, they're very aware of that. So everybody that it's like you're hyper sensitive and hyper vigilant about others, because it's the way you protect yourself, and you can save yourself from more harm. So there is they, them, theirs, Z, her, hers, Z, zer, zers, and many, many more. I don't know these. Is Afton on here? She always has such wonderful input. Afton, are you here? Or
Yeah, no, I'm here. So I am familiar with a couple of the ones, Z, zer, zers, but I don't have enough to speak on it. I know that it was a way to, another way to identify people without using the third, they. So I haven't personally seen it too much, but I know it's out there, and sometimes with the X.
and you also, just like with anybody, you don't want to assume you know someone's pronouns or that you can speak about it. If they haven't shared it, then you don't know. And in order to support people, the more we know, the better off we're going to be. And that starts with being inclusive.
Linda, this is Becky. Can I make a comment?
Sure.
One of the things I think is just really important about this whole part of the conversation too is, you know, just like kind of Christine shared that quote at the beginning, you know, if someone does identify as straight or heterosexual, like they don't often have to come out, or if there isn't the need to feel like they have to come out and put this out there. I think sometimes the same is said about pronouns. Like we look at folks and we make our judgment or our decisions about who they are based on how they look, right? Or maybe how they speak or whatever that is. And so I think it's even more important if you, I want to say this correctly, but if you have the luxury, right, of just having your pronouns maybe be assumed and that feels comfortable for you, that I think it's even more important that you create the the safe space where you are using your pronouns and you're putting your pronouns on your name or on your business cards, or you're setting a space where it's going to be comfortable for everyone in the room to share their pronouns, and you're not just assuming. And so I think that kind of goes along with the conversation too, is creating a space where it's safe for all folks to be able to share whatever it is that they want to share, or not share what they don't want to or need to. And so I think about that a lot when, maybe I'm in spaces where I just, it shouldn't have to be that only certain folks have to or feel the need to identify or disclose certain information. Like if it just becomes normal that we're all just creating that space, I think it makes it safer and more comfortable for folks. So.
Linda, I'll just add one other comment as well, that, if somebody doesn't identify with the gender that you look and you see and you misgender somebody, be open to that feedback that you got it wrong, and apologize and try to remember when somebody tells you their gender pronoun. It's just like anything. If somebody tells you something, they shouldn't have to tell you over and over for the rest of your life, right? You want to be respectful. That goes for anything. If somebody says, "Can you please put the toilet seat down?" you should put the toilet seat down, because that's being respectful of their wishes that they have very clearly communicated with you. But if we get it wrong, because we are learning and because there is a privilege that comes with not having to think about our gender pronouns, right? Just what Becky was saying, that, imagine if you kept getting misgendered and you have to keep telling somebody. It's exhausting and it's wounding to the spirit to be misidentified, right? So let's just do our best. All we can do is do our best. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's a beautiful way to say that. Okay.
Oh, it's not letting me go. There we go.
So some of the terminology, if we were in the room together, we actually have cards that we would break up into groups. Are we going to do that or not? We could go into rooms. No, okay. But here is some of the terminology that you want to be familiar with in your advocacy and in community, including two-spirit, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, pansexual, questioning, or asexual, aromantic, genderqueer, non-binary, gender non-conforming, cisgender, and intersex. Boy, that
Oh, and if anyone has any questions about any of these, I am available to help break it down as well also.
you want to talk about some of the ones that people might have problems because they might not be clear. And so just when you look, I think a lot of people can identify two-spirit, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and trans, queer. But can you talk a little bit about pansexual? Afton?
Can you hear? Okay. So for pansexual, it's regardless of how you identify sexually, how you orient. It's basically having care, love, compassion for someone regardless of these leading identities. That's a shorthand explanation. So regardless of sex, gender, it's a sexual, romantic, emotional. So you may hear people use the word pan, and that's really what that means, is that their love and their romance is not through a specific spectrum or duality of male, female, and etc.
Okay, and how would you define aromantic? Aromantic?
Yeah, aromantic means that you don't have a desire for romantic relationships, romantic, passionate, any of those that would require intimacy with another person on an emotional level. And then asexual is having no sexual desire. So totally two different things. And so it's kind of comes on the same things like gender identity versus sexuality. Even though I may present, or for me, I'm personally a cis woman, but even if I identify as a woman, I may not be or attracted to men. I may be with women. So same thing, you could be asexual or aromantic. Or together, all together.
And what about intersex?
So for intersex folks, they're often left out. So with the gender assignment, there are some people within our communities who have both male and female. And when I say that, that breaks down to scientific, the way that our medical system uses it. Of course, we know it needs to be colonized, but you can have a penis, but also the female reproductive system. So you may have ovaries, you may have female gonads, but with exterior male genitalia. So when we talk about gender assignment, it's really important to remember our intersex community, that they're not left out, that someone may have a combination. And really, it's just when we talk about gender and sexuality, it really is a spectrum, even when it comes to the way Creator made us. Like, we're all very diverse with our bodies. So that's intersex.
Thank you, Afton.
And there are some links that we'll be including in the day 7 recording. There's, I always put that, attach a Word document with any links that we've shared in the chat or any videos. And so there'll be some useful links in there to be able to go check out some websites. And this is just an opportunity to educate yourself, because if this is not your community, you may not have heard some of these terms before. And if you can think about if something is unfamiliar to you, and your advocacy may reflect that. If somebody is disclosing pieces of information to you that you're not familiar with, you want to be able to find that information so you can provide your best advocacy. Okay? And then before I mute, I wanted to add that Mariana posted in the chat that gender identity is fluid. So someone might identify as he or they and then identify as they or them, and it can change, right? So our advocacy, or just in being a human being, it's a good idea to check in. And it's okay to say, can you share your pronouns with me? It's just a good thing to do and get used to doing, to share your pronouns. And it's okay to ask. And so sometimes people are not going to know what you're talking about, but for a person who doesn't present with the pronouns that you're looking at, it can be so affirming, and they know that you are doing your homework and doing your best to be a good relative and a good advocate for them. Okay, Afton?
Yeah, I just saw a question there about cisgender. So that's where your identity corresponds with your, corresponds with the sex that the person was assigned. So whatever you were assigned at birth, whether it's penis or male genitalia, you would identify as a man. So there's no differences in the way you identify yourself. So cisgender. So like personally, I have female genitalia that I was born with, and I'm also attracted to my partner who's a man. So I am cisgender. And for cisgender people, we have a lot of privilege. We don't ever have to be questioned for our sexuality and so we do have our straight and cisgender privilege in that way, that we don't need representation based on our sexual orientation, whereas our two-spirit relatives really need a lot of support and really going to educate people about their experiences the way that us straight people don't have to, if that makes sense.
And this is Becky. I also noticed there's a question from Danielle in the chat asking about all of these genders are confusing. I'm seeing a person as a person, and I really don't necessarily care about their sexual preference. So why is it important to know and understand? And just following up and saying, I hope that doesn't sound negative, but isn't that personal? And I think that illustration that you used or kind of showed right away with the kind of the unicorn, right? The visual, like someone also said, gender is fluid and sexuality can be fluid, but gender and sexuality are not necessarily the same things. And so thinking about how these things will be important in advocacy, Gender in regards to how you are, just how someone is identifying, like that's who they are as a person. And so that's why it is important to understand gender and understand pronouns and understand some of the terminology so that you can be with and speak with people in a respectful way. That might come into play on, you know, even paperwork that you have to fill out with them for reporting, right? Like we all have to do reporting. We have to, you know, share information. Gender can come into play in lots of ways because that's how someone is identifying. That's who they are as a person. When you're thinking about someone's sexuality, so that might come into play also because sometimes we might make assumptions about who someone's abuser is, right? Or their assailant based on what we assume to be their sexuality. So if they say my partner, you know, someone might assume based on whoever's sitting in front of them who their partner is, right? Or who their abuser is. And so I think it's important to understand these different pieces and to always be learning, right? Like none of us are experts. I mean, you can see we're all kind of teaming up together to help explain because it's difficult. And especially if I'm not identifying in a way that someone else is, who am I to speak on their identity, regardless of what their identity is, whether that's race, whatever. But I think it's important to understand, especially when we're in this work, that, like I said, sometimes it might be just as technical as I have to put something on this paperwork, right? I have to check this box, unfortunately. So how should we do this? How can I help you? How would you identify? In other situations, it's just being a good relative or a good service provider. Like, I want to be respectful. I don't want to make assumptions about who you are or your relationship or what you've experienced. And so I'm just trying to understand. And I think I made a comment in the chat earlier about this too, that we make mistakes and we mess up. And when we mess up, I'm so sorry. And we move on, and it doesn't become this ongoing thing. We just do better as we learn and we know better. So I kind of wanted to address that piece there. And I see that there are other folks commenting, but I'll let Christine take over the chat.
There's somebody else with a hand, Afton?
Yeah, thank you, Becky, and Danielle. So another thing that I often think about, that I've often heard from our Two-Spirit community and trans community, it's the fetishization and sexualization of our LGBTQ Native and Two-Spirit, where it's not inherently sexual. And so that's sometimes where we go back to like our boarding schools, where sexuality is a shame for gender, when women were put down, when there was words like sissy. So a lot of people would assume that when we talk about genders, that it's the feminization of men. It's something dirty, and it's not. That's not what our activism is. When we support our Two-Spirit, our LGBTQ non-binary, it's really about how can we support them as a person with their leading identities. So for all of us, we have different identities that shape and inform our world, whether it's your Native woman, whether it's your parent or mom. That's the lens you're going to see out of. It's often your leading person or leading identities is how the world treats you. And so if you are a trans person who may be femme or masculine in the majority of the world's eyes, you will be treated as such and you will be ostracized, especially in a community that's not welcoming to you. And so it's not dirty, it's not to be fetishized. It's how to be a better relative. So I just thought I would want to share in that. It really goes back to that shame in the boarding school, when a lot of our cultural teachings were undone. And so now our generations are relearning it now.
I'll hand it over to Linda, but I wanted to add one comment too. I mean, one of the isms that gets at the root causes of violence is heterosexism, right? It's making the assumption that to be hetero, right, to have, so we see this in the news all the time, that the Supreme Court is looking at making same-sex marriages illegal again, right? Like, so there is heterosexism. There is an assumption that to be attracted or emotionally or physically or whatever, all the different ways, that is the norm. And so what we're suggesting or offering here is that, there is no one way, any way you look at it. We're all across the spectrum and we move on the spectrum, right? So we don't stay in any one place, because as we learn and grow and come into who we are, it may change, right? So our advocacy will be reflective of that people don't just stay the same their whole entire lives, and that they should be safe no matter how they are or feel or identify, right? Because of that extra layer of targeting and oppression, right? That comes not just with being, a Native person in the world, but then you're extra targeted. And some of these slides moving forward, we'll talk more about that. Linda, should I click or do you got more to say?
Well, I think that it even, just the best we can do to try to define so people, and remember, give yourself some space to expand how you're thinking and expand how you're feeling. And it's not a process that, okay, now that we said all that, you feel completely different. It takes some time to absorb what you have been witnessing your entire life, and you've been a part of it. So it's hard to unlearn different patterns of thinking and reintroduce or introduce different ways of being that make more sense when we want to be inclusive. So the concept of gender awareness reminds us that we need to be aware of issues. This is kind of like with power and control. That would be the pull for advocates to be involved and to listen and to have heightened awareness of why are we talking about this. Everybody on this circle or in this circle virtually, are likely to see ourselves within such categories as male or female, or man and woman, man or woman. But these categories do not, in fact, do justice to the complexity of gender and sexual identities. We consciously and unconsciously express our gendered selves in numerous ways, including in our relations with other people. We interpret and evaluate other people's genders, probably within 10 seconds of meeting them. And this affects the way that we're going to interact with them. We use images, associations, assumptions, and normative standards to interpret gender and the sexuality of others. And often we are unaware that it's happening or how it influences or originate. Gender is the key importance in defining the power and the privilege and the possibilities that some people, other people, do not have in any given society. It affects the progress towards equality and the freedom from discrimination. So with those things being said, I think that we understand that it is a whole nother area that we should spend some time in, because it is in every one of our communities. It's in many of our families, and it is a part of our history or herstory as we know it. Many tribes have stories and have histories documented in pictures. You have seen some of them, but also in leadership and in spiritual roles and identities. There are certain things that the LGBTQ two-spirit population is thought to be able to do with special gifts that many others cannot do. So everybody remembering this, everybody has a place in the circle. And we have to be careful because of everything we've been exposed to. It has not allowed us to learn truly more about what our values are, but the place that everybody holds in the space we are occupied for the short time we get to live. So I think with that being said, then you understand, okay, oh my God, it's more to learn. So I'm gonna try it though. Okay, sorry about that, go ahead. So some of the rates of assault on American Indians, we know about 4 and 5 American Indian, Alaska Native women and men have experienced violence in their lifetime. Some people, it's been normalized. So they don't even equate it to violence. I myself am one of those people. I did not understand. I define violence as broken bones and black eyes. That's what I thought. Anything less than that, as a young woman growing up, that's how I define violence. I did not understand the impact of physical or sexual or emotional abuse, even subtle as pinching, pushing, pulling, shoving, slapping, all of those things. But once we define violence to our people or to the people that we're in community with, you would have a lot more people saying that did happen to me. So it's a sad state of affairs, but it's true. This is for only the people who told, because we know this, most of us don't tell anybody. 1 in 4 and 1 in 10 for non-natives. That's from the Center for Disease Control. Also, 85% Two-Spirit LGBTQ have experienced sexual assault. That's from the National Institute of Health. Go ahead. So there are some barriers to reporting. And it is similar, but I want you to think about it like this, that a lot of perpetrators are right in our own families. Also, there is the fear of being shamed or blamed, and that can happen real easily happens in a lot of families, but it can happen real easy if you're exposed to any type of addiction behaviors or sometimes mental health challenges, because people, instead of ever being responsible, they push that out on other people. And so when we witness that, we don't ever want those fingers pointing at us or saying that this is our fault. Sometimes we internalize it and we accept that it is our fault before we've even said one thing. And with that, there can be physical responses to that admittance or that way of thinking. Also, fears that confidentiality may be breached. I have had the wife of a man who was drinking come in and talk about what happened last night. And he wanted the information and the support, but he could not bring himself to talk about what happened while he was in the presence of another man that violated him. So there's a lot of shame and embarrassment and a lot of things that are said that keep us locked into silence. Also, fear of not being protected within the criminal justice system. I have witnessed and seen and experienced from children all the way up to elders telling and then having retaliation happen. And the truth was, the people know their community and the community's ability to provide safety. It's not how we want it to be or how it is supposed to be, but I would listen if somebody's telling you something and look for alternatives for safety. If they're saying they don't feel they would be protected, believe them if they say that, but that can be a barrier to them not wanting to report. Also, there can be fear of having to out themselves to report, to say that and have somebody come back with statements from ignorance or from judgment or from some type of place that is anything but compassionate and validating, can be absolutely devastating for anybody to experience. There also could be threats by the perpetrator to out the victim if they resist or report. That could be used as a tool of manipulation and violence. Also could have past negative experience with systems and not being assisted, supported, believed, or having any type of service that was helpful. And a lot of our systems are not being set up for our Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ folks in our communities. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, this is Christine. I was just thinking about how, like, what's an example of our systems not being set up? You know, part of it has already been talked about, like in our intake forms, or, you know, where you have to check the box of, you know, what gender you are. Or, but if you think about even in, like, if somebody does go to do the forensic exam, you know, is the sane person, the sexual assault nurse examiner, you know, are they responding appropriately? Are they asking questions in a way that is respectful of somebody's gender, right? So, or misgendering, like consistently misgendering can be really harmful, right? Or if somebody has to, what do they call that when you're in the courtroom? When they're providing their statements in the courtroom, and they can be, when you have to stand up and they say your name, they might misgender in that particular setting, right? So our role as an advocate is to make sure that we're doing our best to remove those barriers or interrupt those harmful practices. And that comes, you know, sometimes we, like when we were talking about the medical module, like sometimes you don't confront the person right in the room because that could be harmful or disruptive too. But what does our advocacy look like to address it at a systemic level so it doesn't keep hurting other people, right? Like, who do we have to talk to get this particular protocol or this intake form changed, right? Okay, thank you.
Well, I also think that this happened to me at a big powwow because we were tabling and had all of our resources on the table along with posters, and a man approached me and he was talking, and he introduced himself as a doctor, and he was Native. And he said, I really like your work and what you're doing here. And he was looking at our brochures. And he said, but I see nothing here that would let me know that you would provide me any services. And I said, and I was looking at all the brochures because it wasn't just mine, but it was a combination of mine and another program. And I said, well, what do you mean? And then he said, I'm gay and I was assaulted, but I don't see anything here that would reflect that this brochure is for me, or that this is going to be something I can identify with. And it was within the same weekend that I was in the, you know, I had to go to the food court at the powwow, no, but I was sitting there and a man sat down with me and was talking and asked me what I do. And then he proceeded to tell me a story about what happened to him with one of his uncles and how he never told anybody. And that he is gay and he was a doctor of education. The other guy was a medical doctor. And I was just sitting there and I was like, boy, that's how the creator works with me, like sets me up several times so I can't ignore something that is clearly ignored, so I can see it. And then I'm not going to be the expert at writing, but we have experts in our communities and within our reach, and we should be inclusive. So from there, then, you know, we had printed materials, but if you listen to the stories, and that's listening without needing a response or thinking of a response, but just to listen, you'll hear more and more about what's happening in our communities with our people and our relatives. Okay, do you have anything else, or is that good? Okay. So some of the other barriers to safety from the legal response is we can have many, and I know this is real, outdated tribal codes. Some tribal codes criminalize only penile vaginal penetration as a sex crime. Tribes do not have authority over non-Indian offenders who might be living in our communities. And law enforcement misgendering or causing further harm. Also from the victim service response, some of the service providers may be uninformed or unwelcoming or even hostile. I have heard of incidents over the years where somebody's religious beliefs were very rigid and not accepting, and they have refused to provide services or to work with anybody that they felt was out of their value system. And if you revert back to where we looked at readiness for advocates, then you can see that the challenge is to what you believe and who you are, and then what your job is to provide services to people and to care and to be an advocate for all people. But I'll tell you the truth, it is better that we walk into the day with the idea and the mindset and more the spirit set that I don't want to do any more harm to anybody that's already been harmed. You have to be aware of that and think about what will you do if you hear a coworker talking about that, you know, and saying things that would be not welcoming or harmful to people who are coming to your program for services. They could say somebody is ineligible for services. Some shelters refuse house male identified people. Shelters will not house transgender folks, some shelters. So I think we should be proactive ahead of time, because the responsibility, we had a visit from Department of Health and Human Services director back then. I think his name was Kenneth Noyes, and he traveled to our state to talk with shelter programs. And he asked them specific questions that was tied to their receiving funding. And some people make up their own rules about the restrictions and funding and think that they can discriminate against folks based on their personal belief systems. So I would be very careful when you're handling federal money or state money that was federal money, because the stipulations are on all of the money that you cannot discriminate. And that includes also with creating policies or mistreating, because we could actually cause somebody's further harm or death with not providing services that are being requested. But it's best for us to know and to be mindful that that is our role in the community, is to advocate and support survivors. Do you have anything to add to that, Christine?
I'll just add Afton's comments in here. Dead naming. So, you know, if your legal name doesn't match your preferred name on your state, tribal, or other forms of identification, right? And that can be harmful. You know, we kind of have talked about it a couple different times in a couple different ways, that, you know, my name is Christine Davidson, and that's what's on my identification. So, you know, I have the privilege of never having to worry about that, or never feeling unseen or invisible or harmed by that, right? And so we really just want to figure out in our own brain, in our own being, the importance of, you know, when somebody is telling you, if I told you that my name was Linda, but you keep calling me Christine, right? You're just not being respectful of my being. And so as advocates, and that goes for anything, but particularly for our advocacy, we want to make sure that we're being respectful of the information that they're sharing with us, and advocate for who they are in other spaces and navigating those systems, right? And that will go a long way in having them feel seen and know that they matter, and that somebody's gonna go to bat for them, right?
Hi, all. Oh,
ahead.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca. This is Rebecca. I want to do a little advocacy storytelling that intersects with a lot of some of the issues that we've been talking about, particularly the barriers. So way back in the day, I think it was 2002, I was manager of the hotline, and we did all the night advocacy in the inner city. And we keep moving and pushing and making change, but I almost lost my job because I hired, I'm not, confidentiality. I hired Samantha, and Samantha was a transgender woman. I almost lost my job for hiring a transgendered woman at the shelter we were working at. And with hiring Samantha in the transgender community in that city, folks started understanding that there was domestic violence and sexual violence support systems, right? Like it was a YWCA association, and we did DV&SA and racial justice. And I remember it was like 3 a.m, and we had called someone in to do the intake, and I'm downstairs manning the phone, so the shelter was on the 2nd floor, so you can't be in 2 places at once. So the on-call staff person for DV&SA came in to do the intake form. And in Samantha's community, Mary came in for shelter and sexual violence services in the early morning hours, middle of the night. And this Mary had done the intake, the tour. Very last thing that needed to happen was, okay, let me get a copy of, the protocol, policies and procedures when you're having folks living in your shelter. You gotta photocopy the driver's license and, get your files in order. So if there's a fire alarm or whatever, we have everyone tracked. We're square. Normal policies and procedures. Well, Mary's driver's license said Michael, confidentiality, not saying real names. And immediately, Mary was refused shelter and put back on the street, and she ran past me, and I tried to stop her. It was quite traumatic. It was awful. And then we had a meeting the next day because I was ticked off, and Rebecca gets ticked off sometimes when I see things like this. And and this is way back in the days, this is 20 years ago now, but the conversation at that boardroom table to hash out, what are we doing wrong? How do we make this different? How do we be inclusive? And it broke down to a funder requirement that and this is the actual language back in the day. I don't know if it's this way everywhere, but I'm sure it's somewhere, that no male, child, or otherwise over the age of 14 was allowed to stay in the shelter per funding requirements. So that was, and that's 20 years old, and I know things are changing, but like I said, I don't know that is changed everywhere, but this is where we can get into those policies and procedures and our, what's it called? Our policymakers and our advocates that are focused on public policy to bring this into tribal codes, or maybe you're working as a Native person or an ally in a mainstream organization, that across the board, there are all these little facets to that story where it comes to our shelter policies, our funding policies, that we keep pushing and making change about identities and how are we operating, who's driving the bus, are victims and survivors driving the bus of how our policies and procedures are written and how our practices are, or is the funder just driving the bus because they give us the money? So it's all of these things at the same time. Anyway, this slide just kind of, I had these popcorn thoughts. I was like, oh my gosh, let me tell this story, because it was a long, lengthy process to try to make change on an administrative level. Because at that moment, the funder was driving the bus, not the human involved. Anyway, thank you, Wobula. I just wanted to share that in case anyone else has gone through the same thing.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I think it is in the sharing and the weaving of stories that people can listen and reflect back on the things that have happened and have some type of substance to build off of when they think about what is being shared in this circle. Because not all of these things have happened, but they may happen, or something that looks and feels or sounds similar. So we have something to go by, and to call us back if you need to, or you're remembering this and you have more information that you want to talk about, or something comes up with policies, you can call us back and we will try our best to assist and support you in developing policies, and refer you out if necessary for technical assistance in whatever ways that we can. So with policies and procedures, a recipient may not make a determination about services for one survivor based on the complaints of another when those complaints are based on gender identity.
So this is Christine. Rebecca, when you were talking, I was like, well, the next slide is going to name that they advocates just like us have have organized and talked to our funders to say, that's against the law to discriminate. And so it's written into most of our special conditions. I mean, you might want to double check or circle back, but it's definitely, you can actually lose your funding now for discriminating and not offering services. So we're making some progress.
Thank you. It's kind of weird, isn't it? Like just what was coming up, she started talking about. It's kind of cool. Okay. So some of the implications to change is develop and adopt an organizational philosophy on responses to Two-Spirit LGBTQ victims and survivors. Having those conversations with others on our staff, or if you got a couple of staff talking about this. A lot of times there were people, like I used to do advocacy training, going to do in-services with the people who were in treatment or in facility. We would provide services and talk about DV and sexual assault as the program, and also talked about the Two-Spirit. Make it a part of the things that you talk about when you're doing education and training. If you need to, this is what was extremely helpful for us, was we visited healers that were in community and elders with stories about the tribe. And they would tell you stories and explain the value systems of the people, and that the LGBTQ Two-Spirit population was always included in the circle. It's only because of oppression and oppressive behavior and colonization that we were even exposed to that type of, pushing people out. Those are not our philosophies. Ours is about inclusion, and that is about, only certain people will ever be a part of a inner circle and accepted, but everybody else is on the outside. And a lot of our communities have adopted those type of philosophies based also on church. So we have to be really careful and have those conversations and build your policies in your relationship with other service providers that includes the language that we are discussing today. So it will be more inclusive, and they will reference back, well, the program was talking about this, so they may never hear it from anybody else. So please, also meeting with healthcare providers and sexual assault nurse examiners to learn about their training and see whether they feel confident and comfortable working with LGBTQ two-spirit individuals. Meeting with this is just what I said, meeting with law enforcement and our partners in those systems, and understand how their training and policies guide their work, also investigations and reporting. Checking in with mental health practitioners to see if they have any experience working with LGBTQ two-spirit individuals. And in your work as an advocate and community, you can strategize with your criminal justice system, including the judges, prosecutors, ahead of time on how to respectfully work with transgender survivors. And then, of course, the policy and legislative changes. A lot of our communities will move to do things different once they are connected and they understand their connection to other people that are LGBTQ two-spirit. It's not just certain people's role, it's all of our role in all of our jobs to be connected. Do you have anything to add to that, Christine? Rebecca?
I don't know if I have anything to add. I guess something that I was thinking about is, you know, I've heard across the country over the years, you know, with different tribes across the nation, how, you know, there'll be some pushback when talking about this. And so my real time Christine processing the information is, and they'll say things like elders will become really angry, or ceremonial people will become really angry and say, you know, those people don't have any place here. And so then I'm wondering in my mind, you know, how much of that is that their ancestral teachings that have been passed forward to them in their community, or how much of those ancestral teachings have been influenced by colonialism and church thinking, right? So, you know, what we're offering here is, even if we have deeply held beliefs, you know, because that's why we do that bias exercise in the very first day, that agree, strongly disagree thing, because we really want to recognize that, of course, we have deeply held beliefs for all the reasons, right? But our role as an advocate is that we check those deeply held beliefs at the door, and we do our best to meet that person wherever they're at, because at the end of the day, they have experienced sexual violence and many layers of violence likely. And, you know, to provide our best advocacy, there's room for every human being to be able to access safe services, right? And that's what we want to do. So I guess that's what I'm kind of pondering. Yeah, I've heard all kinds of things over the years, right? I don't know if there's others who want to offer any insight or ask any questions.
One of the things, this is Rebecca Baylock. I just wanted to chime in. When we were doing the sex trafficking talk, I talked about the boardroom table. If you're not at the table, you know, the oppression happens. And, you know, the quote was, if you're not at the table, folks are on the menu. And one of the things I find really beautiful about peer-to-peer appreciation and love and creating space is actually creating space for folks to represent themselves. And when it comes to traditional council, tribal council, community engagement, sorry, there was a little tech glitch there. Community engagement, invite the youth, invite a diversity of identities into our leadership programs, into the community event leadership. If we're going to do a potluck or a powwow or a two spirits powwow, they're pretty awesome. There's a couple of those going around in Indian country. Create space for leadership, because when it comes, like, I'm half gypsy. When I have an opportunity to do gypsy work and I'm invited to provide my feedback and leadership, That's the same thing for every other identity out there. Invite, and when we invite, then like with Samantha invited and it notified Mary that there were services available to her. So it's all about the invitation to be equality based, but create the space for others to join and speak for their community at the same time, if that makes sense. I just felt the love of a lot of this discussion today. And if we create space for folks, they will come. And then we just expand on safety and care, right? So thank you.
Thank you for that. And I kind of felt like there was a couple slides missing, and when I was moving forward, I over-clicked. So I'm going to go back to 2 slides that we missed, and we've kind of already covered it. But I also just think it's important to reiterate, right? Our role as an advocate is to provide that sincere, non-judgmental connection, you know, reaffirm that confidentiality, address any fears about, you know, the systemic response, right? Be prepared to get in the middle of that to, you know, interrupt those harmful processes, right? Making sure we're educating ourselves, right? Addressing homophobic or unprofessional treatment. And, you know, you'll have to follow your instinct when the appropriate time to do that. I mean, sometimes it is helpful to have somebody intervene or interrupt harmful practices or language or behavior right in front of you, because you're like, man, this person really is going to bat for me. But you'll have to use your instinct on whether it, you know, to do it in the moment or whether it's something that you will address privately later, right? And checking in with the survivor to see if they want you to, you know, how do they want you to proceed with it? You know, it's worth it to check in and ask. And then some things that we can do within our organization, right? Clarify and affirm those access to services. So what Linda was talking about, you know, doing a, what's it called? Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on a text analysis, looking at the language that you're using in all of your information. So, you know, that's what we're trying to do even with this, with these PowerPoints. And sometimes we catch places that we missed it where we have real specific genders, right? And we know that sexual violence knows no gender, right? The acts of violence know no gender. So we're still learning too and doing our best. And every time you notice it, work on it, try to do something to change it, right? Making sure that we're trying to provide gender inclusive bathrooms and facilities. So sometimes that means just taking this is a picture my nephew drew for me, but sometimes just taking a piece of paper and taping it up over, you know, over the, you know, how the bathrooms have like a little stick person and then a little woman with a little skirt, a little stick skirt, right? So just taping, you know, a little sign over it that says all genders welcome. Something like that can be really meaningful. And if you never thought of doing that, or you're kind of angry about why we would do that, that's us needing to check our privilege, right? Because that would be really cool if somebody noticed something like that on my behalf. I would feel like I'm really seen and that I matter if somebody were to do that, right? So be thinking about that. Inclusive signage, we talked about that. A write-in space for gender and gender pronouns on the forms. So rather than having them have to check a box, you know, just leave a blank space there so they can self-identify. Look at your anti-discrimination policies. You know, what language is written in your policies and protocols, but even further, is there an anti-discrimination policy in your policies? The absence of one says everything also, right? And then what are our protocols? Like, you know, what is the shared understanding at work, in my environment, or even at home or at the ceremony hall? Like, what is our practice and protocol that we're going to be engaging in that makes everybody feel safe and seen, right? what is our policy for addressing harmful behavior or words, right? So yeah, those are a couple slides that we missed. Yeah, Afton added listening to the youth. This generation has taught us adults a lot about compassion and non-judgment. Definitely. Okay, yeah, I think we covered the rest now.
One of my favorite things about the kids is that there was a political entity here in the United States who was running for president, and they disagreed with his political stance. So they bought out the whole stadium. And so all of the tickets were accounted for to have no presence there to take in the negativity of this particular political entity. So it's cracking me up. I love this youth. This Gen Z is just so funny and so smart.
Afton, that's so true. The generations that have come up behind me. I mean, I think I don't even know what I am. A Gen X? I don't know. I'm 52. What does that make me? A Gen X person? I don't even
Gen
know.
X. Yep, Gen X. Yep.
Boomer, you're a boomer. No, I'm
You're
just
a boomer. Come on now. But you know, all these generations that are coming up, the language that's evolving, the sort of the advocacy and activism that is coming. I mean, they are teaching us so much every day. And I feel like that's good advocacy, right? To be breaking down these barriers. And I'm so relieved, I guess, and honored and happy that the society is changing, right? Not being so close-minded and afraid all the time of everything.
One of the things I remember around the same time that Afton was talking about, where they bought out the stadium, just before that, and I don't want to get political, so I'm going to kind of vague, but there was a big CNN open stadium conversation. 1 second, please.
That's why I said political entity.
Yeah, no, I heard you. Yes. And it was magical because these youth, they went on. When I was a teenager, you put me in a stadium in front of about 200,000, I would have been like, and my mind would have went blank and I would have been sweating bullets and all the weirdness, being awkward. But these youth came forward and spoke so elegantly and eloquently. But one of the things they said, and I'm a diversity, like it's just a thing, I love it so much. And they said on the stage in front of CNN correspondents that were having this political debate over a thing, you will not divide us. You will not divide us by race, faith, ethnicity, gender, or sexuality. We are here standing together. Don't call us in because I'm Black or I'm Native or I'm gay or I'm straight or I'm trans or none of it. They said, we're just together all the time. Stop, adults, y'all stop trying to divide us. And I was just like hooping and hollering, like I was just on my couch freaking out a little bit, but it was beautiful. And that's the gift. And this is why I think junior board members or creating a space at the table for the youth to join us because they have so much to teach and it's so awesome. Anyway, I wanted to blurb. Thank you for letting me blurb.
Oh, Linda frozen again. Linda.
She responds to, listen, Linda, listen. Watch, she's gonna pop up.
There she is.
I knew it.
Oh, you're muted, Linda. Oh, guess she's not gonna talk.
No, I wasn't. I'm sorry. I was trying to talk. That's okay. I love the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions for Linda or comments or stories they would like to share? Any corrections folks would like to make?
This is Rebecca one last time. I'm sorry, I'm so talky at the end of the day, but I want to just uplift the unity, United Native Indian. It's unity. I don't know the acronym anymore, but it's all an entire youth conference. And they have 25 under 25, and there's teenagers there. And that unity conference is almost like this basket of wealth for tribal speakers across domestic violence, sexual violence, youth leadership, LGBTQ. If anyone is looking for a speaker or a youth leadership, they trans from West Coast to East Coast and back and forth across Turtle Island. The Unity Conference is a wealth of youth leaders, and they're being honored, and it's amazing. And I think if there's a leader in your tribal community that is participating in the Unity Conference, they might be wonderful resources for y'all. Just wanted to, and I'll put the link in the chat. Thank you.
Any last words, Miss Linda?
I just was thinking of something that was said a long time ago when we talked about the high rates of violence against American Indian Alaska Native folks, including teens. And they equated the violence that our Two-Spirit LGBTQ relatives experience as having a target on their back. Because the people who were seeking them, and in this instance, in the sex trafficking, was they were not seeking them for sex. They were seeking them for abuse, torture, and humiliation, and degrading them. So there was not just the fact of being Native that put a target on them, but there was a double target on them because they were members of the LGBTQ Two-Spirit community. So I want you to think about it like that, and that we have, it is our jobs as advocates to be able to advocate for all of our people that are victimized with sexual violence. And the more we know, the safer our communities will be, because we'll spread that around with education and training and true support and true advocacy to the best of our abilities. And I think it's a place that we all can improve in different areas of our work. And it's just asking us to do our jobs to the best of our abilities, if possible. That was what I wanted to say. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you so much, Linda. So anyone else in the room want to offer any insight or tips to do better advocacy? So it's more than just like, you know how like sometimes in Indian country we joke that like you can't just hang up a picture of a feather or a dream catcher and call it Native, right? So the same thing with the Two-Spirit community, that you can't just slap up a rainbow flag and think that you've done enough, right? Like really this is about the constant learning and evolving in sort of indigenizing the way that we offer our services or do our work, right? Our advocacy can reflect all of the nuances, right? The ever-changing gifts that each of us are. And so, that's our invitation, right? Danielle's posting that learning a lot, just to be proud of who you are. I always introduce my wife. Right. And, you know, Carol, there's a risk every time you introduce your wife, right? And that's the reality. And that's where heterosexism and homophobia comes in, right? Like when Carol introduces their wife, that's a risk every single time, ongoing, forever. That is a risk. And what we want is for it to not be a risk. We should just be able to introduce our partners at any time without feeling like, should I do this? Should I not do this? Are we going to be safe here? Right? I mean, that's kind of what we're getting at, that, you know, that extra layer of targeting and violence, that's rooted in oppression, right? That's a tactic of oppression. All right. Good stuff. Thank you all. Thank you for the teamwork making the dream work with all of our technical issues and freezing up, Linda, freezing up, and all the things. Afton, for your perspective. Awesome stuff. So we wanted to leave with these two modules. You know, a lot of times we find that there's questions and stories. So we wanted to leave ample room for discussion. You know, so we finished up a little bit early today. But, you know, we could stay and talk if you wanted to. You know, we'll stay on. We'll shut the recording off and we'll, you know, have a debrief if there's some questions that people wanted to ask, you know, not on the recording. So Ashley added in the chat that they're doing a training on the intersectionality of LGBTQ two-spirit and DV and SA for the Department of Justice, where the targeted audience is law enforcement. That's awesome. If anyone has specific barriers that they have seen with the LGBTQ two-spirit folks reporting to law enforcement, please email Ashley Zubek at, and then they have their email there. That's awesome. So I guess to kind of close out the day for folks that, you know, you're welcome to log off for the day. We have one more day left. We have the core skills of advocacy and then advocate self-care on Thursday. And we will be complete with a whole month of training, which is pretty crazy. First, it seemed like we would never get through it. And now all of a sudden we have one day left, one session left, right? So for folks who are going to log off, we will see you on Thursday. I'll put the video in as soon as it renders. And yeah, this was a good day. Thank you, everybody. Nell's sharing some good stuff. Isaac is thanking us. Makes you sad every time, Carol. We'll be having an in-person version of this training in September. So I'm going to try to do like one virtual and one in-person training and see how that works, right? We haven't done it in person in years now because of the pandemic. So it's always fun to be in the room together, but it's a super intense week because we're like there Monday through Friday all day. It's an intense week, but it's also done in a week too. So pros and cons.
I wanted to say that also after you have finished this training, that we are always looking for people to co-facilitate or present for us in an area that you're really comfortable with. So please keep that in the back of your mind, that, and also you could bring this to your community. Sometimes a lot of us have extra funds available because we didn't travel anywhere for 2 years. So you might want to think about hosting a 40-hour. There was a time I think Christina and myself did like too many 40 hours. I don't remember how many in that year, but it was, we just kept moving. So it was good. And the good thing is you get lots of people from community when you host that. People you never thought would be sitting there, and it makes us stronger as a community and as families to have the information available. So it's not just advocates' jobs to know. We we look at it as it's information everybody should know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the in-person one will be in Duluth, but yeah, we've traveled all over the country. We just have gotten on a plane and we bring our computers with and we just do it wherever. So we've been all over the place. Even in those old crazy desert climates. Y'all are so tough in those desert climates. I can't believe it. 110 degrees that one place we were at. Holy smokes. I didn't even want to go outside on breaks. Yeah, Mariana's asking how folks are doing in the heat. Oof. Okay, I'm gonna shut the recording off. And then we can just stay on a little bit longer and y'all are welcome to log off, okay? And so for the recording, we'll see you on Thursday for the last day. Miigwech.